This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? I'm here with Wren, Collier.
Hey, everyone.
And Joshua Cutchin.
Good evening.
And we just accidentally recorded a Patreon segment that I'll be putting up on channeling and other things that just turned out to be as good as any show we were going to do on that type of stuff. So we're going to throw that out to Patreons. And right now we're going to deal with the subject of, well, basically, I guess the subject we're going to deal with is, why does any of this stuff matter? Like, why bother researching it? Why look into it? Is it, because a lot of people will approach this as fun. They like scary stories. They like, just hearing weird stuff. It's not important to them. It's like entertainment, which I think is why so many reality TV shows have taken off with this stuff, because it's entertaining to people. But I've always approached it as, I think first off, I've always loved mysteries. So anything that's a mystery is interesting to me. Like, I want to know, like that draws me in. But the more I get into this stuff, the more I realize that some of this stuff is kind of important. And I mean, if you think too much into it, you end up down that rabbit hole of, why is anything important? And then you start going, well, why are we even here? What's the point? Et cetera, et cetera. But from a shallower depth, when you look at this stuff, you could say, well, if Bigfoot's real, is it really important? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it'll tell us something about where we came from if he's an ape. But if he's not an ape, that could tell us something about reality. So to me, a lot of this stuff talks about very much who we are, the way we view things, even urban legends and mythology talks about who we are and helps us better understand who we are in this, and like how to function in this reality. And I think figuring anything out would potentially tell us something very important. It's just a matter of what, because I do think a lot of this stuff is connected in some way. It may not be the same thing representing, but it's representing through a facet of reality that we don't understand. And when, on the other hand, if you look at like the ancient civilization stuff, you have the import of, if there was a cataclysm in the past, which all evidence points to, how do we know it's not going to happen again? And what can we do to prevent what happened in the past?
I mean, yeah, I honestly think that there might be something important to the Bigfoot discovery. I mean, I think that giving us a better sense of where we are biologically is just as important as giving us a sense of where we are in modern day historically. So I think it's sort of like the other angle of the importance that we would have after discovering a pre-existing civilization. Also, I mean, from a moral or ethical standpoint, I've often wondered if, the reason, if there is a government Bigfoot cover-up, it's because they are an indigenous people whom we have been trampling the rights of for years and been marginalizing even worse than probably any other group by, denying their very existence, if they are indeed human beings, if they're more close to human beings. So from a moral standpoint, there might be some reason to, there might be something that makes the Bigfoot, reveal important.
That makes sense. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way.
I like the idea, but it's not like that's ever stopped us before.
What do you mean?
In terms of oppressing indigenous people.
Oh, well, no, yeah.
I know, but I'm saying, like, that would be a reason why the discovery or the disclosure of Bigfoot would be important, is because there's an ethical component to it. Otherwise, I mean, yeah, I remember. Oh, go ahead. What?
I was going to say, like, I've heard a lot too about there being a possible financial component to that, like having to close down logging operations and create conservatories, and how much of a financial nightmare that would be. I don't know if I'm on that side of it either, but I've also heard that was an argument as well for not disclosing the existence.
Yeah, and I seem to recall hearing a good argument against why that was the case, and I can't recall for the life of me what it was.
Yeah, I've heard that too, so that's kind of why I'm not like totally on board with that idea either. But I think that's probably no disclosure for the same reason the UFO topic isn't fully disclosed, and that no one really knows what is going on.
Yeah,
But,
well, that's a
yeah,
possibility.
but go on. I interrupted you a bit.
As long as we're talking about that, I mean, like sometimes I wonder if the reason that there isn't disclosure is that they know something's going on, and what they know as a governing body is that it's not that we aren't alone in the universe, but rather that we're living in a non-materialist reality. And how do you govern people if if that's a proven fact? If they realize that there's some sort of sovereignty that they have that isn't given to them by our governmental structures. That seems like it would be a headache that they would want to avoid, and perhaps that's the reason that we've if there is a non-materialist component to the UFO phenomena, that's the reason why we haven't heard about it yet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see the same thing with parapsychological research. I feel a lot of the efforts to debunk it, and we know things like RV are real. The U.S. government spent an inordinate amount of money doing it, and is probably still doing it.
Doing what? I didn't quite hear what you said.
RV,
eating Arby's.
Getting Arby's,
remote viewing. Okay,
roast beef sandwiches. Yeah. But yeah, like the remote viewing program that we ran. I mean, it was obviously real. There's tons of documentation, but people still try to debunk it, and I think because on some level it's deeply scary that there is a world with no secrets, that literally anyone can access any information anywhere at any time using only their imagination. That's deeply terrifying, I think, to power, and one of the reasons why there's a concerted effort to debunk it.
Well, and the great irony is that even if you don't believe in psi phenomena,
mm-hmm.
and if you were alive during Project Stargate, you were paying for psychic phenomena to be studied.
Yeah, studied successfully as well. But yeah, I mean, and that's kind of why I think these things are kind of important. I mean, maybe this sounds a bit dramatic, but I think that studying the paranormal and studying parapsychology and the occult are important because the literal like fate of humanity rests on it. I feel like stepping into the realms of like psi research is looking at sort of the evolution of mankind, and it could have real implications for our future among the stars, our future on this planet, and the future of this planet. I've got a lot of ideas about the sort of trajectory that mankind could take if this research was to reach a certain level. Ideas about sort of human transcendence. And like I said, it's very, very dramatic and bombastic. But again, I think that we're looking at research that has implications that affect everyone. It affects our entire future, our society that we live in, and that's why it's important that we take it seriously.
Okay. It was Strieber, I think, at one point had said that the UFO phenomena may be the very face of evolution.
Exactly.
And this stuff may be waking us up and turning us into something else, and it might be cyclic too. I mean, that's the whole argument that what's his name made in The Lost Star of Myth and Time, Walter Cruttendon. That we're traveling on this cycle from a dark age to a golden age, and we transform upwards till we get to the golden age, and then we start losing it back down to the dark age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you look at the sort of not very well elaborated on sort of hints of information that came out of the New York Times article, where they talk about people experiencing physical changes, like genetic changes, maybe morphogenetic changes because of encountering these type of entities or encountering these type of materials. We could be looking at something that is actually driving the sort of evolution of mankind.
But we also know that, there are physical changes when people, you have conjunctivitis when people have looked at these things. You have the woman who touched the ring that a UFO left and she lost all feeling in her arm. So this might be the type of thing they're talking about too. That was a very vague reference. And the literature is filled with people who have had physical effects from seeing UFOs or encountering UFOs. And I'm guessing, Josh, there's tons of correlations in fairy lore.
I mean, yeah, it's if you wanted to. I mean, usually it's a little bit more extreme, but I mean the idea of getting conjunctivitis after seeing a UFO is paralleled 100,000 times by people, warning that if you saw the fairies, you'd go blind. So if you're going to spy on the fairy maidens, close one eye or hold your hand over one eye. I mean, that's not quite the same thing, but there's a little bit of an analog there. There's a tale of someone walking along a road in Ireland, and they encountered the banshee. And when he greeted her, she rubbed his head, and he was bald for the rest of his life. Which you can see in sort of it sounds a little bit like non-ionizing radiation symptoms, or maybe not non-ionizing, but definitely some sort of radiation sort of effect. So yeah, there are definitely correlations there.
Yeah, it makes me think of sort of the 2001 monolith kind of idea. I mean, that's the way I read the New York Times piece, in that it was because I look at people who encounter UFOs, who encounter otherworldly entities, who come out of it with psychic abilities, who come out of it with an expanded awareness, increased spirituality, the sort of Jacques Vallée thing that he studied. And I wonder if this is, I've talked before about this with you, Seriah, but the idea that this phenomena could be some sort of literally like a morphogenetic virus, like a sort of forced evolution or injection of code or DNA into the morphogenetic field of mankind. And I'm gonna who's the morphogenetic guy? I'm gonna sound like an idiot now.
Right. UK guy. Man, I have to go to my email because I have something from him.
Sheldrake.
Yes, Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah, I've been reading some of his stuff recently, and his idea has been meshing a little bit with my idea about this thing being maybe some sort of mind virus. Because I'm like, if there was a field that not only contained things like memories and our collective unconscious minds, but also actually affected us on a physical level and actually on an epigenetic level, would it be possible that you could hack that field and insert your own code and change mankind literally from the collective unconscious out into the physical manifestations that we exist in? And, I've thought a lot about how this whole phenomena could be a manifestation of that. It could be something literally hacking humans and turning us into something else. Like a forced transcendence or evolution. That sort of, like I said, it sort of reminds me of the monolith idea from 2001, that this sort of alien artifact induces evolution in whatever beings encounter it. And I feel like that parallel is played out a lot in both, parapsychological research, UFO research, and even fairy lore.
But it's not always a positive transformation though when people encounter this stuff. It can go either way. And I feel like that part of that, but not all of that, can be how someone approaches it. In more personal encounters, I think how you feel about it, if you approach it with fear, you get that sort of fear reaction back. But there are physical effects like conjunctivitis that clearly does not matter how you approach the phenomena. If you look at something and you get conjunctivitis, it's not because you were afraid of it.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's a physical element to it. And I think about things like the X-Men, like comic books and stuff, especially like the X-Men. For every, Cyclops or Angel, there were also people like Beast, or people who had like horrible mutations that made their life awful. That they all were treated the same way. But it could be something where it doesn't always come out positive for everyone that encounters it. And maybe there's something that gets unlocked in certain people who encounter it, that, unlocks something inside of them that gives them abilities or increases their ability to understand things like psi or harness it.
And of course, the same thing can be said of people who have had near-death experiences. Like Kenneth Ring showed that the near-death experience and the alien abduction scenario creates a lot of the same after effects.
It's fascinating. It's almost like they're touching something that unlocks something within them. It's just, I don't know what those things are. That's the real question. Like, what about it, and what is being unlocked?
Yeah. Josh, any thoughts?
No, I think that I think that Wren said pretty much everything that I would have to add. That's what happens with smart people.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's vastly important for us to understand, because it's fun to read about near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and science stuff. But recently I've been, and maybe this is just because I haven't been exposed to enough research, but sometimes I feel like parapsychological research is just doing parlor tricks, making pinwheels spin under glass. I'm like, why don't we take it further? Why don't we see what? I'm always interested in testing the limits of things. Like I'm satisfied that it exists. The question of it isn't, none of it's in question to me that these things are real. It's more, decades of research state that. I'm interested in knowing, like, how far can you take it before it breaks? Like, and I feel like that was sort of the idea in a way. I mean, I know that wasn't the stated idea of like chaos magic in the 80s and stuff, but I feel like that was the impetus. Like, how far can you stretch magic before it breaks? Like, how much can you stretch this? Like, how far can you take it?
And that's always been my approach to things. It's like, how far can I go with this before I go, oh, crap?
Before it either blows up in your face or doesn't work.
Yeah.
How far will the rubber band go before it snaps?
But that's, I mean, in terms of them doing parlor tricks, it's never going to happen in a laboratory setting, I don't think. I think this is sort of psi phenomena 101, but I think that setting precludes that happening at all.
At least any major level.
See, I refuse to believe that, though. I think that's just, I don't know, capitulation. Maybe I'm over enthusiastic about this, but I think that one of the major problems with parapsychological research, and this is something I think you saw manifested in SRI's research with Ingo Swann, was that it's boring. It gets boring for the people doing it, and when they get bored, it doesn't work anymore. Ingo got incredibly bored by the the targets they had him looking at, and so he finally said, "Screw it, I'm going to look at Jupiter." And so he looked at Jupiter, and it worked magnificently. So I almost wonder if some of these things that, because they talk about how it's when it first gets started up, they have these amazing results, and then they starts to peter out.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's just because when you first get started in anything, you're super enthusiastic about it. You're ready to go, and then it's like you fall into a routine, you fall into doing the same old stuff every week, and you get bored. And we know that so much of this stuff has to do with the imagination and enthusiasm and confidence. Maybe those start to peter out the longer this research goes on, and that's why you see that lack of results as time goes on.
I think it's more than that, though. I think it's also, what is it that Kripal said? These things happen to us for a reason. Like, it's not something you can necessarily just decide you want to happen. They happen because they're transformative in some way.
What if they could? What if you could do it on command? That's what I'm talking about, like stretching the limits of it.
Yeah, I think some people can to some degree,
how do we chaos magic this?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I sometimes I wonder if, yes, perhaps this sort of thing can happen in a laboratory setting, but it can only happen in a laboratory setting in a society where these concepts are already widely accepted. If that makes any sense.
Well, no, do you think it has some sort of morphic quality to it? And that,
it makes sense to me.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
The more I read the Sheldrake stuff, the more I'm thinking about how, this may tie into a lot of the ideas I've had. Can't believe I've slept on this for so long. But you're right, Josh. Maybe, a group of people in an area believing that something like this is possible actually makes it possible.
Well, and if you look at the way that, like, human society and human advancement has sort of been governed through the years. I mean, we have plenty of examples of instances where inventions were created at the same time by people from completely different parts of the world. The tea kettle hinted at the idea of steam power long before anybody actually put two and two together. Maybe we're just, as a society, whatever the cosmic powers that be have just decided that we're not ready for this yet. And once we are, then yeah, like a morphic field sort of concept, it'll make it easier for these sort of things to be a little bit more bombastic, which I mean would explain why you see in the magical tradition things seem to be a lot more reliable and seem to be a lot more overt in different epochs of history than the one we're in right now.
Yeah, the idea that magic used to be easier, that the world used to be more enchanted in some way than it is now, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I don't think that goes to the cyclic thing, because it seems like the world, if it was more enchanted, it was more enchanted during the Dark Ages. I mean, maybe not. Maybe that's just the holdover from the time period before it. But most of our magical traditions track right back into that Dark Age period.
Mm-hmm. And was it like Josh said, because more people believed that those kind of things were possible then?
Right, exactly.
And I mean, that goes back sort of the Nick Redfern final events kind of idea, that one of the reasons for cover-ups and not disclosing things is because if we believe that there are aliens, then there will be aliens. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like somehow, like if society, it's not that society can't handle the idea, it's that literally if society all believes that it is happening, then it's going to start manifesting. In a sense, we'll start either creating it or letting it in, and that terrifies certain groups of people. And I wonder if a lot of this sort of skeptic, I don't necessarily think there's like a conspiracy among skeptics, but I wonder if somehow deep down they're all scared of it.
Yes. No, I think that's definitely. I think there's obviously, you can't just say. I'd rather say debunkers rather than skeptics, but
yeah, debunkers. Yeah.
And you can never paint anyone with a whole single brush, but I think there are definitely the debunkers who are literally scared. This stuff scares the hell out of them. They don't necessarily realize it, and their response is to sort of unconsciously deny it. I think some that are just very stuck in that paradigm of materialism, and it can't be wrong because it's what they believe. I don't see people who are set on debunking things as being overly strong mentally, because I think that's such a closed off mindset.
Yeah, it's that fear that the entire worldview and mental sort of palace that you've built for yourself is made of cards, and that if you pull out one card, it's all going to start crumbling. And I get that. Like, that's a scary thing. Like, the idea that you might wake up and the world is way stranger and more different than you could have ever possibly imagined it could be.
Which is what I want every single day.
Yeah, exactly. There's people like us who love that. Like, we live for that. That's exactly what we want. But some people just cannot handle that. I mean, that's just, they cannot do it. That's too much for them. It's too much sensory overload. And
I think
I understand that.
I think they feel like it makes the world less safe, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. But I think that's the sort of knee-jerk reaction. Like, if this stuff is real, I'm not safe, because it lacks a certain stability they've had their whole life.
Well, yeah, it pulls the rug out from under you. I mean, then if this is real, then is this other thing also real? If Bigfoot's real, does that mean that werewolves are real? Is Dogman real? It's like all of a sudden it opens up, it casts doubt on everything from the ground up. And for some people, that's just not a way that they can exist mentally. It's not that we're any better or anything, and I don't mean to imply that. I just mean that, like, some people just can't handle that. They can't handle that. It causes such anxiety in certain people.
Or they don't want to. Or they don't want to handle it. You know, I mean, some people want to just live their lives and not think about this stuff and not be bothered by it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. Everyone's different. Everyone approaches, you know, reality differently. And I think everyone plays their own part.
It's interesting. It makes me think, like, what makes us run towards the gunfire?
And that is very much me. I was talking to someone last night. I was talking about there's a podcast called The Phenomenon, and I guess it's based on a book. I haven't really looked into the book too much. Decent podcast, but it starts out with the world being surrounded by some kind of alien craft that create a grid around the entire world, and it starts off with this woman or this couple being woken up by their cell phones giving an emergency message, and the message says, "Stay indoors. This is not a drill. You know, to stay inside. Don't look outside. Don't look at the sky." And of course, the guy goes, "What?" And he gets up and he walks over to the window and he looks up at the sky and he's immediately drained of all his blood and collapses in a heap.
Oh, wow. What is it called again? You cut out for a second.
The Phenomenon.
The Phenomenon. Okay.
But I'm thinking, yeah, that would be me. I'd be like, don't look at the sky. Why shouldn't I look at the sky? Let's go find out. You know?
Oh, okay. That's really similar. I see what you're talking about. I was thinking it was something else. That's also really similar to another sci-fi story I read years ago, where it was sort of the same setup where, you know, basically these aliens build like a sphere around the Earth, but what it does is actually speed up time outside of Earth, while keeping time like basically in stasis within the Earth. And so like everyone sees the stars like going super fast around the planet all the time.
Oh, that's
outside.
Interesting.
It's a cool story. I had to remember the name of it though. I was like, I'm gonna get mixed up with this other thing you mentioned, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like, what would happen to our society if something like that was to just happen out of the blue?
Well, in the case of the Phenomenon, everyone dies. Like
Yeah,
95% of the population dies within the first couple of days.
That's great.
But as far as the running toward the gunfire, that's exactly what I would do. I'd be like, well, why can't I look at the sky? And if I was going to be careful, I'd say, all right, I won't look at the sky. Where's my video camera? You know?
Mm-hmm. Let's poke a mirror outside and
Yeah.
try to look at it that way.
And I'm really hoping they have a good explanation on how that's possible. I mean, they have numerous times during the show said we don't know how this is even possible. So, I mean, they're smart enough to realize it's kind of a crazy idea. I'm just hoping they have a good follow through.
It's sort of like in Blindsight by Peter Watts, sort of a similar setup at the very beginning of the story. Like these sort of big blocky like alien ships just set up in a giant grid around Earth, and then they take a picture of it and they disappear. And no one like knows why, and it becomes like a huge kind of miserable thing that society has to go through. Because they didn't contact us, they didn't try to talk to us, they just like took a picture of us and flew off, you know? So it's like we have no way of knowing like what was that all about? Like, are they coming back? You know, and they never do, you know, spoilers, but they never find out what it was all about.
That's wild. See, an idea like that really captures the alienness of what I think an alien interaction would be.
Exactly.
If it could happen in real life.
What if there are Martians and we're doing that very thing to them right now?
Mm-hmm. They have no idea what's going on. Yeah.
What are these things? Where did it go?
Yeah, why is this weird crab running around on the surface taking pictures?
I'm sure some comedian has made a joke about this at some point, but you know, having a dog, whenever you have a dog and you clean up after it, I always wonder if the dog is going, why is this person collecting all my crap? Like, why does he care so much? Every time I take a dump, he's going after it.
Yeah.
And when we, like I said at the beginning here, when we look at all this stuff, one of the things that strikes me is that I don't think we have any concept of reality. I think we think we do because we have this sort of shared knowledge that's been passed down, and we have sort of the, oh, if you touch that, it hurts sort of response level of things. But we don't know what life is. We don't know what death is. And when you deal with some of these phenomena, it seems to blur that line. Not just with near-death experiences, but with like when you look at ghost phenomena, when you look at channeling, when you look at UFO phenomena, where you see, you know, spirits of the dead involved in these, you know, like Whitley is the new book on that. I think that's connected to what the new book is. Whitley's working on. I don't remember the name of it. But I think it was partially with spirit communication with his wife Anne. And I think it has a lot to do with the dead being involved in UFO encounters and visitor encounters and things like that. So when you look at all this stuff and you realize this stuff just blurs the line, I think there's a good possibility that the way we learn more about where we are and what this is by studying these phenomena that don't fit.
Yeah, but
in other words, the reality will be determined by the outliers.
Yeah, yeah.
The exceptions will prove the rules. Yeah.
It's almost like an extra dimensional physics. Like if you want it, you can't see something that's 4-dimensional, right? But what you can see is the shadow it casts. You can see in the shadow appears, you know, 3-dimensional. In a way, it's sort of similar to that idea. We there's no way that we'll ever have, I think, a unified field theory of the paranormal. But
No.
I think we can look at the outliers, we can look at the weird stuff, and we can maybe put together a better understanding of reality by examining the shadow of reality.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Looking at the outline of what you can't see directly.
Exactly, yeah.
Mimic the obliqueness of the subject, as Greg Bishop would say.
Yes.
On a T-shirt that I own.
And I don't think there's going to be a unified theory of the paranormal. However, I think there are elements there that many of these paranormal phenomena utilize, whether it be a co-creation type of thing, or they're traversing some element of our reality we don't understand. And they may not be coming from the same place. They may not be the same thing, but they're all sharing that thing.
The Venn diagram touches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Mac Tony's thing. You know, he talked about the laser pointer and the cat, right? And you know, see, he said, you know, he wanted to, you know, you play with the laser pointer, you point it around, the cat chases it, jumps up and down. The cat never realizes that you're causing that to happen. You know, that you're holding like a little device and you're making the dot appear. It only sees the dot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, even if the cat turned around and saw you holding the laser pointer and somehow put it together, he still doesn't know what the laser pointer is. Like, he has no context for a laser or that kind of technology. He wouldn't be able to understand it, even if he tried. And I think that's the thing we have to remember with this kind of stuff. It's like, even if something came down tomorrow and revealed all to us, we somehow pulled back Oz's curtain and we were able to see the truth, it's not like we could understand it. You know, I don't think we could. It would still be indescribable. It would be, you know, again, like, we have to look at the shadows it casts because we can't visualize the realness of it. And it's like glory, you know?
Yeah, and that's, again, there's that idea that I've always had that we're trying to find the edges of what we do know and seeing if we can make out the shape of what we don't know. The podcast Tannis, the fictional podcast Tannis, I think does a great job of that. Like, because they kind of, when I listened to this, the thing that struck me is it kind of gelled with my view of how we research the paranormal, where you can't address this thing that is Tannis directly. So they kind of indirectly move around it, trying to figure it out more and more by how they're moving around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's almost like an optical illusion or something that you can't look at if you look at it directly. You know, if you try to look at it directly, it just moves or shifts.
Or like the way that if you try to look at stars, you know, it's this exact same thing. You can sometimes see stars better out of your periphery than you can by directly looking.
Yeah, and sometimes you can see little segments of galaxies very faintly as long as you don't look at them directly. because the sides of your eyes pick up that light better than I forget what the rods and cones and which one's which. But if you look at it directly, it suddenly fades out because it's not picking up light the same way.
Yeah, and I mean, back to the topic. I mean, maybe that's why studying this stuff is important, even if it seems like just a lot of nonsense when we try to put it together into a whole. Maybe it's not meant to be looked at in a whole. Maybe it's important because we could, use science and material physics and stuff to delve deeply into the secrets of the universe. But maybe the real shape of things will only be found by looking at these odd cases that don't seem to fit with the rest of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how this stuff interacts with us and why.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's all just us. And again, that's one of those questions where the further you go down the rabbit hole, the more it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if it is just us, it's not the us we recognize. And maybe everything is one, that we're all part of one being separated into pieces through ego and, detachment.
Yeah, I always think back to the section in Robert Monroe's Far Journeys where he talks about going to the future and encountering a mankind that is like basically at peace and because they were able to figure out how to essentially control matter and energy using their minds. And so it's completely like post-scarcity society. Like no one wants for anything because you can just make whatever you need on the spot. And so I think about that sort of world that we could live in, and that's also why I see this stuff as important. Because I mean, even if that was just a fantasy or just, there's plenty of like other channel type stuff that talks about futures like that, or maybe we were like that in the past. But I feel like it's important again for us like to understand how this may affect our own course of civilization, course of human evolution. Where we could be one day. It's like a way for us to look forward into the future.
And that's also kind of the Star Trek ideal that there's no want for everything. Everyone, they don't have money. They can create whatever they need and everyone's kind of taken care of. And that's what, pushes us out to the stars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if we didn't spend so much damn money killing one another, we'd have a lot more money to put into stuff like going to the stars.
Yeah, it'd be a start.
Academy of Arts and Sciences. Sorry. TM.
Now, if you look at the whole lost civilization thing, there's the obvious warning there of, okay, if it happened before, it can happen again. Robert Schoch dealing with the idea that we could be hit with a solar flare at any time. Thinking that, his thinking is it was a solar flare that pretty much destroyed the previous civilization and caused the flood. And he has, something plasma-based is likely to have been involved. There's enough evidence to suggest that. But you have like the Carrington event that happened at the end of the 1800s, which fried out telegraphs and things like that. If we got hit with something today like that, we'd be done for as a culture because it would fry everything. Our technology would be out the window. And what people don't realize, like when you have power stations and stuff, they don't have spare generators sitting around for these power stations that we use. They build them when they start to go bad. So it's not like they could say, okay, well, let's go into our warehouse where we have all these power stations and components and put together new ones because it got hit with a solar flare. It'll be, if it could even be recovered, it would be decades before power would be restored to anybody.
Well, let me tell you about something. I totally agree with you on that, but there are backups.
Are there?
I know this because I've seen them. I don't want to go too much into this because I don't know how much of this is like, crap I shouldn't be talking about on the air. But there are places where the U.S. has thousands and thousands and thousands of backup transformers in storage. because they know that this is going to happen, or at least it's been planned on. Like they have contingencies in place. And you're right, they're extremely expensive, and I seriously doubt they would be distributed to like the general public. I mean, if a Carrington event kind of thing happens, like we're screwed. Like, we're not going to have power, but the U.S. military, I guarantee you, will have power.
Oh yeah. Plus, their stuff is also going to be protected better anyway.
It's kind of secret squirrel stuff, but I know people who work there, and this isn't like super like conspiracy type stuff. It's pretty common knowledge where I come from, but there are places, like depots and stuff that have like huge backups of like transformers and things like that. And it's not explained why they have all this stuff, but I highly suspect it's because they are at least aware that this is a possible thing that could happen.
I always remember. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I always remember, like, whenever I'm in the middle of a book, I'm like, what if there's a Carrington event and I lose my book? And I'm always like, I'm going to have bigger problems if there's a Carrington event than my book being lost. But yeah, I think, regardless of how much preparation the establishment has put into this, I can't help but feel like it's going to be a rough time for anybody. And I think that the fact that however much they have prepared, they haven't prepared enough.
Oh yeah,
and it's criminal because it's something that we know can happen. It's just it drives me up a wall.
Well, they prepared it for themselves. They haven't prepared it for us.
It's not something that can happen. It's something that will happen sooner or later.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think when I saw what I saw, that's exactly what I thought. Like, they know it's going to happen eventually. It may be, 100 years from now, but they're going to be ready for it when it does happen. I don't think they think they take it very seriously, the idea of it happening, because it's happened before. In our like living memory, it's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. But Seriah, I was going to bring this up. I mean, some stuff that Walter was saying on Conspiracy Normal got me thinking about, these ancient civilizations collapsing and stuff, and the idea that some of these entities that contact us and that, these kind of spirit guides and civilizing spirits and that kind of thing in the past, he put forth this really provocative idea that they were preparing us, that they were like teaching us something that we shouldn't be knowing, that they were stealing fire effectively and giving it to us to help us prepare for something. And it's a very like kind of like sci-fi. It's a sci-fi trope that you see in a lot of things like Mass Effect and other type of media where there's some sort of other alien civilization that kind of exists on the periphery of things. And that whenever, they sort of watch humanity or watch for civilizations to pop up in the galaxy. And whenever they do, and they reach a certain point, they come start everything over again. And they reset them, so they don't exceed a certain level of development. And I mean, of course, this is like pure speculation. This is very ETH-y, but I mean, what if that was the case in these solar flares and these Carrington type events? What if these were not necessarily natural events, but were triggered when human society or human civilization reaches a certain trigger level?
Yeah, you've met the threshold. Time to push it's time to erase the etch-a-sketch.
And maybe that's what these civilizing spirits are trying to prepare us for. Maybe that's why they're trying to teach us, or teaching us technology and magic and psi and all this kind of stuff. Is because, I don't know, maybe they think that we'd be able to fight back, or maybe maybe they've fought back in the past and have either failed or succeeded, and they're trying to gain allies, or they're trying to teach us how to fight for ourselves.
I often throw around the idea that maybe the reason these resets happen is because we are not balanced. Like if you look at the Earth as an entity, like as as a being, as some kind of conscious being, albeit completely different in the way that we view consciousness, it could be that essentially it purges itself after a certain point. Like we pollute it too much, we infest it too much, and at some point it kind of just shakes everything up and resets everything because it's killing it.
I think the biggest argument against that idea is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Carrington event happened at a relatively, comparatively diminished state of technology compared to where we are now. Like that doesn't seem like that there was anything going on at that point that would have been the time to flip the kill switch.
Yeah.
No,
Maybe
that,
not the
oh no, they've
Carrington.
got telegraphs. Look out!
Yeah.
that
Maybe not the
that could have been
Carrington event in
natural
particular.
versus something
Yeah.
that is provoked. You know.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, I
I'm more
misunderstood.
like
Got
more
it.
describing. Yeah, I mean, I said Carrington event, but I'm more describing like something truly catastrophic, like something that has reset these civilizations in the past if they existed.
The Carrington event wouldn't destroy us today. It would destroy wherever area it hit, but we've seen bigger flares, and luckily none of them have been pointed directly at Earth.
I mean, I think about Brandenburg stuff about Mars, exhibiting what looks to be symptoms of nuclear warfare, and we have the maybe in implication that there have been nuclear weapons used in the ancient past on the Earth.
You're talking about the Mahabharata?
Yes, yeah, exactly, the
Mhm.
Astras. So what if that's the deal? When these societies reach a certain level, maybe Martian civilization reached a certain level, and somebody decided, well, these guys are getting too big for their britches. We got to, nuke them from orbit.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's good points all around because I mean, as anti-ETH as I generally am, I think that the biggest clues for extraterrestrial life that we aren't looking into as a ufological community in general are Mars and whatever the heck is going on in in Antarctica.
Yeah.
I think those two are leads that we're really denying.
Yeah, and I should be like completely clear here. I 100% believe that there are extraterrestrials. I just don't think the flying saucers and the grays are the extraterrestrials.
Right.
I think
Yeah,
that they're
yeah.
probably definitely extraterrestrials. They're just not the ones that we think are the extraterrestrials.
And if the Greys are extraterrestrial, I don't think they're coming here on nuts and bolts crafts. I think they're interacting with our consciousness.
Yeah. See, I think there might actually be, honest to God, nuts and bolts craft.
Yes.
Nuts and bolts craft. But just that they're not here now. They've probably been here in the past, and
Maybe.
they probably visited Mars in the past. But like I said, maybe this is speculation, but maybe they're just hanging out, just watching us.
Well, if you can project your consciousness across time and space, as it would seem remote viewing can do, and if it seems, as in some cases, that the viewer, the viewed rather, can see some sort of phenomena surrounding the viewer, then that seems like a much more parsimonious way of traversing the galaxy. I mean, just sit in your own home, or go down the block and sit in the lab, and go to Earth, as opposed to getting in some sort of clunky nuts and bolts craft and taking forever to get there.
Yeah, and I definitely believe we're encountering some of that as well. I mean, I definitely 100% think that some of the entities that people might have encountered are literally just like projecting themselves across time and space using psi. It's like I have this weird sort of mental mythology where I feel like there are probably a mix of both civilizations that use psi to travel through space and time, and civilizations that use nuts and bolts kind of craft. And they're probably vastly different, involved on vastly different planets. And I just don't, like I said, I just don't think the flying saucers that we encounter on Earth, the UFOs we encounter on Earth, are necessarily the nuts and bolts craft that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about these nuts and bolts craft that nuked Mars, if that's exactly what happened. But again, in the Indian texts, the Astras were described not as actual physical weapons, but things that were done mentally. It was like described as like a mental weapon, like a blade of grass could be turned into the Astra, and
Really?
yeah. It was like kind of described as like the ability to use the Astra was like an inherited ability that was given to an individual, and it was more like a psi effect than it was like an actual physical weapon or anything. Like it was like a person who possessed the Astra, they could only use it once, but they could literally take a blade of grass and that could become the Astra and cause the destruction.
Sort of like Gambit in the X-Men comics. He could take anything and throw it, and it would, right? It wasn't that his shtick.
Yeah,
he could take anything and throw it. He just happened to prefer playing cards.
Yeah, and like it makes me think about like the the Japanese movie Akira, where the main sort of title character Akira caused a huge, essentially like nuclear explosion through uncontrolled psi effects in Tokyo in the 80s. Or I think it's in the 80s in the story. But yeah, sort of the idea that like maybe mental effects could actually cause this kind of destruction. If somehow like if somehow psi effects can actually manipulate matter, perhaps they could also manipulate matter on the level of causing, uncontrolled chain reaction. Can you split the atom with your mind?
Well, I would think it's theoretically possible.
Maybe that's why they're scared of it. Maybe they don't want to. They don't want an Esper to like blow up New York because they accidentally learned that they could manipulate energy and matter with their mind.
I mean, it seems like we all affect things on the quantum level, just by observing it. So, under the right circumstances, the right person, developing it.
Mm-hmm. And even on a, I mean, purely just like talking about nuclear weapons level, I may be wrong in this, but I think it was Carl Sagan that said this. If we probably won't encounter alien civilizations, but we'll encounter their ruins. They're likely radioactive ruins, because there might be a point where every society discovers, or every technological society discovers, uranium-238, and they blow themselves up.
But that also assumes that all societies are going to develop the same way.
Yeah, it's very anthropomorphic. I mean, it's assuming that the same kind of, that this would be like human style, life forms, and they would think any similar way to us or whatever. But it could be that the intent of these sort of civilizing, entities is to keep us from doing that to ourselves. I mean, that's the whole contact T thing from the 50s. That we should blow ourselves up.
True.
I just can't get over the idea that somehow like the idea is that they're either protecting us from ourselves or trying to protect us from something else that they're scared of. I don't know. So it's a very evocative idea. I don't know how much I've really fleshed that out. It still feels kind of half-baked in my head, but I think it's very evocative.
Maybe they're just scared of what we'll do if we get out there.
That's true. Maybe they're scared of us, Maybe we're a scary race to them, That's another sci-fi trope, that aliens look at us and they're terrified because we grow quickly, we expand quickly, we tear each other to shreds all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're like an unbound atavistic manifestation of pure will.
Yeah, and we're basically psychopaths.
Yeah, an entire planet of psychopaths.
Especially compared to someone who might be more unity based,
yeah.
or hive minded. A hive mind would not understand the way that we do things. They'd be like, what's wrong with these beings? Why would they hurt each other?
Yeah, I mean, to a hive mind, we might look like a giant entity that's just constantly eating itself, self cannibalizing. If it might be horrifying to them.
Yeah.
Psychopathic locusts.
Mm-hmm.
I could picture that. Like I could picture them looking at that at the Earth and just being like, what is this horror?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have to, we might be horrifying. I mean, we are sort of horrifying as a species anyway. I mean,
yeah.
You ever hear about how we used to hunt animals before we had spears or bows or anything? We would just walk after them. We just follow them like a slasher movie villain.
Oh yeah. Until they collapse.
Until they collapse from exhaustion. Yeah, and then we just eat them. Like we're kind of a horrifying species anyway.
Of course, we don't know for sure that we did that.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything in the deep past, it's kind of half guesswork.
Yeah.
And that's another thing when you look at the deep past. Like, why is this stuff important? It's where we've come from. It may be what happened to us, but also it's something. When we look at how old things are, and the ages just keep getting pushed back and pushed back. it changes where we've come from. It makes it less and less simple and more complex. We like to divide things up. We want everything to be simple, and none of this stuff is the ancient past is simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one linear line that starts out low and just keeps getting bigger like they kind of want it to be.
Well, it's the thing that the drum that Gordon White keeps on banging is that progress is not a straight line.
No, not at all.
And in anything really, of course, but especially in terms of development. I mean, fits and starts and backtracking, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's and sometimes I think that in terms of technology and in terms of the way that we should be living our lives, we get halfway up the ladder and realize that we've put it on the wrong wall.
Well, yeah.
And like you said, Seriah, it's important that if these sort of resets have happened in the ancient past, if we've been here before, logically, you would move on from that and say we're going to be at the end again. And if we don't understand what happened, if we don't understand what caused that to happen, we'll never have any chance of surviving it this time.
Yeah. It's just going to be the same old, same old. We'll be knocked back to the Stone Ages and have to start all over with a small population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the way it should be. I don't know. Maybe that's the natural course of events, but I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it. It's definitely a possibility, though. I mean, if we're here to learn certain things, it may, we may only be able to go so far.
Well, I'm going to throw this idea out there, based on sort of Robert Monroe's work. If Earth is literally like a greenhouse, a giant battery for Loosh, sort of the energy that's created by evolution and fear and suffering, what if the whatever harvests that Loosh or harvests that energy that's created by the cycle of evolution on Earth doesn't want us to leave?
Yes.
What if we get to the point where we're about to leave? They say, "Oh, well, the batteries." It's like, I don't know if any of you guys watch Rick and Morty, but
I've been told to.
There's one episode where Rick creates a pocket universe, and he uses it as a battery for his car. And inside the pocket universe, there's all of these like little beings who see him as God, who basically create the energy for the battery, and he has to convince them that they know that you don't need to like leave or make your own universe and stuff. You need to just keep making me power. And what if we're in a similar situation where we're providing energy for something, and whenever we get to a level where we're about to like leave and stop producing them so much energy, or we're gonna like not be contained within our little greenhouse anymore, they have to, well, we can't have this.
Yeah.
And it almost makes me wonder if the ideas, like the recent explosion and popularity of ideas that like space isn't real and the Earth is flat and all this, we can't leave and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's implanted into the human collective unconsciousness on purpose. Maybe that's to dissuade people from leaving, or even believing that we can leave.
Right. Or I totally forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
Sorry.
Not your fault. Just my random brain.
Well, that's really backed up, Wren, by the fact that like there's so much insurmountable about us going into space in terms of our physiology. I mean, we're not built for this stuff. And even with our current level of sophistication, we aren't anywhere close to really overcoming a lot of the challenges that we'd be facing in terms of the way that our bodies react to a zero-G environment.
Yeah, not even close. Yeah.
I mean, some of the things that happen to astronauts who have been up there for extended amounts of time are absolutely horrifying to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've had the idea for a long time that we're physically never going to be able to really live anywhere else other than Earth, and that basically we'll need to create AIs and machines to travel out to the stars for us.
And we already have.
Mm-hmm. And we have, yeah. Already, we've taken the first sort of stumbling steps in that direction. But again, maybe that's like you said, Josh. Maybe that's by design. If we wanna think that there's any design in this sort of design of Earth and life on Earth, maybe life in general, like carbon-based, replicating DNA-based life, maybe it's designed to stay on the planet that it's created on. Like because it acts as some sort of energy or generator for something else, like Monroe said in his books.
Yeah.
But
Or maybe, maybe to go into the realm of reckless speculation. Maybe we had a window to prove ourselves worthy of getting off planet, and Gaia was like, "Yeah, that's not happening. You missed your window, and we're keeping you here so that you won't go anywhere else."
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think it's maybe that's the purpose of the civilizing spirits. Maybe they're trying to teach us how to get off world. Maybe they're not they're not carbon based life, like they're not material life like we are, and they're wanting to help us become like them and not be stuck here forever. Maybe that's kind of the idea. Again, reckless speculation, but I mean, I think that's an important concept. I mean, I don't necessarily just want to be a cog in something's generator forever, I'd like to get off planet. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, this is all reckless speculation, but I like doing personal mythologies in my head while I'm
well, maybe
ideas here.
if reality is a series of nesting dolls, maybe we're the outer shell, and we need to look inward for our escape, for our salvation, in terms of the human race.
Mhm.
Not just in terms of, being kinder to each other in a spiritual sense, but like literally, like looking to inner space, looking to the different states of consciousness as a way of getting off world, so to speak.
Yeah, like you said about the idea of being able to travel via out of body states and things like that. I've rung that bell a little bit. That if you want to go to space, if you don't believe that space exists, I was talking to somebody in another chat about this a while back. Like, if you don't believe that space exists, or you think that it's some sort of like hologram or illusion or whatever, just go there. Like, you can go to space. Like, it's not that hard. I've been to Jupiter. It's crazy. It's like
yeah.
you can either RV or do OBEs there, and I don't think it's any less valid having an out of body experience and traveling to the moon than it is like getting in a physical, solid state rocket and like traveling to the moon that way. Either way, you're going to the moon. I mean, that's why the Aboriginal people of Australia were unimpressed when told that we had traveled to the moon, because they were like, "So what? We've been to the moon. Went there a long time ago." And it's not like they're not implying that they physically went to the moon. It's just that you can go to the moon.
Well, they may have, maybe been bringing forth an ancient memory of physically going to the moon.
That's true too. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I mean, we don't know what kind of technology an ancient race on this planet may have had.
Yeah, I mean, we're forgetting, obviously we're not mentioning the moon bases that ancient humanity built. So.
And there is some weird stuff on the moon. I mean, there's no two ways about it. There's weird stuff on Mars. There's weird stuff on the moon. It's not stuff that you can say 100% is artificial, but it definitely doesn't have a good explanation. The moon itself doesn't have a good explanation for why it's there. Nothing about the moon makes sense. There was a scientist who once said the best explanation for the moon is that it doesn't exist. It's just a hallucination.
Or that it's an artificial satellite.
Well, that's one of the possibilities. Yeah, because it's hollow. There's no theory on the moon's formation that actually works 100%.
I mean, I sort of think about it. If we're talking about this idea that we're being monitored and something is going to reset us or press the reset button eventually, I mean, why not the moon be? What if it's the reset button? I mean, I think back to, I can't remember if it was in Communion or Transformation. Whitley Strieber has this vision of like the future in which the Earth is being bombarded, like the moon has cracked, like the moon has opened up, and it is crashing down on Earth and destroying civilization. And I'm like, what if that's the contingency plan? Like the moon was put here as a contingency plan.
that is a scene in what's the name of the H.G. Wells one?
The Time Machine, the remake of the Time Machine.
Yeah,
that
the
came out in
remake of the
90s.
Time.
Yeah.
Yep. That exact thing. And I thought that was one of the only things I liked about it is him showing up and the moon is breaking apart the sky, and it was like, oh, that's really cool. And then of course wisely he leaves.
Yeah, it's also an element in the anime Cowboy Bebop, where sort of like a hyperspace research, kind of hyperdrive research, accidentally cracks the moon, and the Earth gets just bombarded by meteorites and moon debris, and so mankind has to move off planet and like colonize other planets like Mars and stuff because Earth has become completely uninhabitable due to constant meteorite showers. It's a cool idea, and I think what's interesting about it to me is that Strieber has this vision of this. I don't know if the people who made the Time Machine movie read that and then like decided that was a cool idea and they wanted to put it in a movie, or if it's just, is this an idea that we just all have down somewhere inside?
When did Strieber have it though?
It was in the 80s, I'm sure.
Okay.
What Time Machine movie?
It was when was it released?
It was the remake.
Yeah.
But was there a similar? There wasn't a similar scene in the original, right?
No.
Okay.
It was 2002 when it came out.
Yes. Yep.
Got it.
And it was terrible.
It's pretty bad.
Aside from that one scene.
Yeah, that scene is extremely evocative, though. I remember seeing that and being like, I'd read the Strieber thing like years before that, and I was like, holy crap, that's just like what Whitley Strieber was talking about in his book. I was like, it made me think that they'd somehow knew about that book, but if but it's not an idea that is like unheard of. There's other like, there's even the game like the Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, like the main plot point of that is that, in 3 days the moon is going to crash into the planet and like reset everything.
Now, see, the big problem though is when you bring up these problems with the moon, you get that condescending sort of, well, that's the god of the gaps idea, which there's some truth to that sort of that being a logical fallacy. But
it's the what?
The god of the gaps.
Explain that.
So it's a logical fallacy. It's a logical fallacy that a lot of that's quite popular in the atheistic, skeptical circles, which is the idea that just because it can't be explained by modern science doesn't mean that it's anomalous or that it's proof of anything that can't be and won't be explained eventually by science. But
sure, okay.
I'm always reminded of a Rupert Sheldrake comment rather, that is this is sort of the empty blank promissory note of materialist science. It's this idea that, well, if we can't solve it, it will be solved eventually, and it's its own. I mean, obviously, there is a logical fallacy to that, but at the same time, it's awfully smug to just say, well, materialism will solve this at some point. It will. Just have faith in that.
Yeah. And it may be science, but it may not be the material science that solves some of this stuff.
Oh, right. And again, like it's difficult because materialism has, infected science, the scientific establishment, like a maggot. But just because I'm anti-materialism doesn't mean I'm anti-science. I think that those are not. I think that those are pretty much mutually exclusive. It's just that they've been conflated in a big way nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certain things that I don't think, like when we're talking about psi phenomena not being easy to reproduce in a lab. That's one of those things where our scientific method may have to be altered a little bit to kind of get any further with this type of stuff. Instead of just saying, well, it doesn't exist because we can't replicate it, we may have to come up with a different way of understanding how to replicate something like that, or understanding that it may not be replicable in a standard format.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I meant about it getting boring.
Yeah.
Like, the scientific method doesn't account for boredom. I mean, that's kind of the point of the scientific method. You repeat things over and over again and try to get the same result each time to confirm your theory or your hypothesis. You have to. That's the only way you can confirm stuff. But maybe these type of things that primarily rely on things like imagination and confidence and stuff, they don't necessarily work within that system. You can't just force it to happen. It has to happen naturally. It's almost like inspiration, like Josh, like in music. Like you can't just force yourself to write a song or write a poem
Yeah.
or do
Yeah.
art. Like maybe Psy is a lot like
Well-
art, like magic. It has to sort of come from somewhere.
To be fair, there is a workman's attitude that you have to have, but it sort of reminds me of, I think it was a Handel quote, that he used to pray for a good melody, because after that everything else would fall into place. That was the one thing that he couldn't
Yeah.
he couldn't grasp hold of. But it's interesting that we're touting science on one hand touts reliability as being the holy grail and being the be all and end all, and yet we have this replicability crisis in science where it's become quite difficult to replicate the findings of most, or quite a few peer-reviewed journals in the modern establishment. So it's does it need to be replicable or does it not?
Yeah. And I mean, things like inspiration, I mean, are just basically non-repeatable. No one can get just inspired on command.
Yeah.
You can't just force that kind of thing to happen. You can kind of follow the method, and like I was saying about songwriting, people can just churn out a mill of songs. It doesn't mean they're going to be good songs, or like songs that actually mean anything or like move someone. I feel like you can't force that kind of stuff. That may be one of the large kind of things we're not really looking at in parapsychological research. Like the very nature of the phenomena itself doesn't really mesh with rigorous scientific testing.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, it really is sort of the ghettoization of psi in a lot of ways. This idea that these phenomena, these fringe topics, have been deliberately walled off by this other tradition, simply because it doesn't meet that criteria. This is where the rich concepts live, and all the poor concepts have to live out out in the cold.
I saw this. I was just like Googling some different stuff about the RV programs and stuff. And I saw this New York Post article that was discussing how they used RV during the Iranian hostage crisis. And the article had this little, how they'll have like a little quote, that like their little kind of BAM quote that they'll put sort of in the middle of the article. And they mentioned that it only had like a success rate of like 30% or something. And it was kind of touted as if that were like, oh, well, this is useless because you can only get it right 30% of the time. I'm like, that is amazing. I look at that and I think it's information that came out of literally nowhere. It came out of like psychic functioning. How is 30% not like incredible? You would expect it to be 0%, a coin flip, Something like 30% is mind-blowingly accurate. If it's information that is literally
Who
pulled
was it
from
that
the
was
ether.
saying? Who was it that was saying that there's more efficacy? There's more proven efficacy of psi phenomena than for ibuprofen. Is that right? I
Really?
heard this quote on some podcast somewhere that I think it might have been oh jeez.
I have made the comment that there's more evidence for psi phenomena than there is for dark matter.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
because there's zero evidence for dark matter and plenty for psi, but dark matter is accepted and psi isn't.
Yeah, I mean, we know that psi exists. I mean, anybody who doesn't believe that, at least on some basic level, it exists at this point, I just can't even understand. And that's why, again, like I'm not too concerned in my own studies and research and proving that it exists, because I'm convinced that it exists. Given the body of knowledge that it currently exists on it, it's that I'm more interested in taking it beyond that and understanding, as much as we can, like why it works and what are its limits. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Like it's baffling that people don't look into it more or aren't amazed by the results that exist. Like I said, 30% is incredible. If somebody was able to correctly tell me a bunch of information about something that they've never seen 30% of the time, like I would find that absolutely amazing. You know.
Well, and this, I mean, it that's the one thing where I get a little bit smug and dismissive is when people haven't availed themselves of the psi phenomena research out there. I mean, it does seem to me like, you know, it is open and shut and done.
Mhm.
The other thing that makes me tear my hair out is when people say, well, you know, that doesn't mean that we have to entertain any other ideas just because telepathy is real doesn't mean that, you know, that's not that we don't have to be completely scientific about this. I'm like, yeah, okay, scientific, yes, but you don't realize like there is literally no way that psi phenomena has any place in the current materialist understanding.
Right.
At
Mhm.
all. And it's amazing for me to be for people to be like, oh well, that doesn't prove anything. Woo, that's not woo. That's not. You know, there's no reason that we have to entertain ideas like, you know, magic. What magic with this idea that consciousness this is just telepathy. It'll be proven somehow through materialism. And I'm like, you really do not have a fundamental grasp of what materialist science is.
Yeah.
And the basic fundamental tenets that it holds. I had a series of conversations recently about this, it's just it's frustrating because I feel like it's just a wall that people are so married to the current establishment, and this also often happens with people who are really into the ETH. People just can't get over this hump that this means that this literally means that you have to throw out everything that you say is a certainty.
Yeah.
You know, the laws of physics are now the guidelines of physics.
Yeah.
If telepathy is real.
Yeah. It kicks Humpty Dumpty right up the wall, and they're like staggering.
That's a good way to put it.
They're putting him back together, and they like tape it back together and fix him with super glue, and they're like, look, he's still the same. You know, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. Even though he's, you know, full of cracks now and totally messed up looking, this doesn't mean he's fine. You know, that's their attitude. Because you're right,
exactly.
It puts huge cracks in the whole sort of worldview of materialism. And yet, you know, they see it, and they like, you know, it's like we talked about before. They just can't imagine a world without that. You know, it's terrifying, and they're like, you know, Humpty Dumpty's fine.
House of Cards.
Mm-hmm.
It's a house of cards at that point.
Absolutely. And if we change directions and look at, you know, things like a lot of the reasons people get into ghost hunting and stuff like that, aside from, you know, some people just enjoy doing things like that, it's fun to do. It's also about proving there's some kind of life after death, proving that, you know, we go on. And I don't know that ghosts necessarily prove that. Again, I don't think it's that simple. But, you know, it's important in its own way that I think that we feel that there's something more to our existence than just what's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely does. You know, it gives people, it opens people up.
Yeah.
To something bigger than them. You know, even if, like you said, you know, I'm not entirely convinced ghosts are actually like dead human beings, but it definitely seeing something like a ghost or having like a near-death experience or having an out-of-body experience is something that proves to you beyond shadow of a doubt that you are more than your physical body. That this flesh you're wearing is just temporary and it's just here now in this place, but that whatever you are is bigger than that. That's an incredibly important thing for people to realize, because that opens the door.
Yeah. And you can, you know, you'll have atheists who will say, well, you don't have to believe in something else to, you know, to live your life to the fullest here. And I totally agree with that. Mm-hmm. You should live your life. You shouldn't be, I don't feel you should be living your life for the afterlife.
No, of course not. It's nihilistic. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, knowing that this is just a small part of existence, it's a much better feeling than thinking, well, this is it, you know, whether it is or not.
Well, yeah.
Well, and you know, I think Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh. Fine.
We know so many people want to point to religion as being a catalyst for violence, and it certainly is. I'm not denying that at all. But they also sort of wave their hand to the idea that a complete lack of belief in anything can also be a real catalyst for violence. They're really ignoring the fact that it's really just humanity has a capacity for violence, and will look for any way to justify it, whether through, the lens of religion or non-religion, which, again, circling back around, is kind of a form of religion. So, I mean, that's when I always get, between that and the tired, how could a just God let children suffer and die? How could a just God do this and that? Which is a super narrow-minded Western idea that there's no inherent value in suffering. Or, also sort of denies the idea of the Eastern ideas of karma and those sort of things. Between those two arguments, every time somebody starts saying those, I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with like college dorm room level of questioning your spirituality. They're not to say that there aren't people who engage in deeper levels, but those are not the arguments that I even try to I even engage with anymore, because they're so basic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on a very basic level too, having knowledge that this is just like that there is something bigger than yourself is incredibly comforting to people. I mean, even if it doesn't open them up to the wider universe, I mean, just knowing that, I believe, helps people like deal with grief and deal with the passing of loved ones. Like when I was a kid, I was like terrified of death, of like my own death, of dying, of other people around me dying. And it wasn't until I had a psychopompic experience with my great uncle, like seeing a raven on his boat that I shared a moment with, and that flew away kind of at the moment of his death, that I like came to terms with like death. And like I realized, okay, well, this isn't the end. Like I don't have to be scared of it anymore. I don't have to constantly be terrified of like that I'm going to die all of a sudden anymore. And the effect on people's mental health is incredible. Like just, when being able to like accept that knowledge and be, it's a very comforting thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you find that people who have had near-death experiences more often than not embrace life much more after the fact, not because they almost died, but because they have that sense of they are a part of something bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if they feel like, well, I really want to go back to that place, but I realize it's not time yet,
Yeah. And that's why, I like Josh was talking about all the ways people bash religion because of things like violence. And I'm like, all the things that Josh said, great. And I just wanted to add to that by saying having that comfort and that belief in something bigger than you is one of the most positive elements that I
and not saying that religion doesn't deserve a black eye every now and then. I mean,
yeah,
far from it. That's not what I'm saying. As as a practicing Christian, I think religion completely needs a black eye every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of things have been done badly in the name of religion, but the basic idea that it's something that bigger than yourself that you can believe in. It's something that reassures you about your existence and about what the world is at large. Like those things are positive things, I feel.
But the key too is that things are done in the name of religion. It's not the religious structure itself that is causing this. It's people using the religion as a reason. You're going on a witch hunt because, well, the Bible says you can go out and be a sadist and kill these witches. It's a channel for something that's already there.
Exactly. It's something they would have done anyway. They just sort of they're just using it as a cloak to kind of assuage their own guilt. Like they don't want to feel guilty that they're just bad people doing these bad things. They have to say, oh, well, we're justified in this way or that. And
how often is it used in politics to justify one thing or another? You got, I always use this example. Right now you have, this whole terrorist thing going on in the Middle East, a lot of it being pushed forward by people who are claiming to be Islamic, who aren't necessarily following anything that Islam says. But if Texas was invaded, you could see Texans rising up and defending themselves and possibly doing it under the flag of Christianity. because many people, there's a large Christian population in Texas, and what better to rally around than something that, you all have in common.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, religion has been used as a tool for like social control, certainly, and it's been used as like that probably since organized religion's inception. But the basic sort of idea that religion can give people spirituality and it can help them understand that the world is bigger than just the material, I think is the valuable part of it. That it exists for a reason, and I think it's valuable for that.
And then the other question is, are we capable of understanding some of this stuff? Like, is it, Timothy Renner always likes saying, we're not going to figure this stuff out. Like, it's interesting to investigate. We might get a piece, but we're not. But is it something we can figure out? I wonder. Like, is our brain, is our limitations here in this reality too limited to fully comprehend some of the stuff we're dealing with?
Maybe. that's my position on, because I'm like, I want to find out either way.
Right.
It's like I want to take it to the limit. I want to take it as far as I can and try to see as much as I can. But maybe in the end it won't be possible. Maybe it's like trying to see a 4-dimensional cube. You just can't do it. You're just not in the right place to do it. You don't have the frame of reference to see it. Or maybe you don't, as long as you're stuck here in the material. I mean, maybe once you pass on and
go,
in this,
hey,
yeah,
look at that.
Yeah, you're like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense now. I get it.
And I also tend to lean toward the belief that there's multiple parts of us, so that there is that ego part of us that might remain as a ghost, and whereas the deeper part of us moves on, as we shed it, almost like a shell.
That's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. Yeah, your ego stays behind as the ghost, but then your true self kind of moves on and rejoins whatever.
Yeah, which is why ghosts never have all that much interesting to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like a memory ghost.
Yeah,
there's a shell of what you were.
Right. It's still you on some level. But of course, then you start dealing with the different levels of consciousness and self. I mean, Egyptians believed there were different levels of self. When you look in the Kabbalah, they have that idea of the shell of the ego being cast off as well. And I think, if I'm pronouncing it right, it's the Liphoth, the Liphoth, I think is what it is, which are the shells of the ego.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like we're like nesting dolls, like Josh evoked before.
The Lithoth?
Yeah, it starts with a Q.
Yeah, it's QLIP.
Oh, Kilithoth.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds a bit Lovecraftian.
It does. It does. And honestly, my studying the Kabbalah combined with my reading Grant around the same time has completely muddied which one is legitimate Kabbalah and which one is Grant adding things onto it.
Nice.
Because I want to... Huh?
Oh, go ahead.
I want to say that Jewish tradition states that there is a dark side to the tree, and that's where the Liphoth, or whatever you want to call it, however it's pronounced, exists. But
that was my understanding of it. That's how I read it.
Yeah. And I know Grant has sort of mapped the dark side of the tree and filled it with Lovecraftian typed entities, saying, it's the dark side of our consciousness and our dark urges and things like that. There was something else there I was going to mention. Oh, there is a tale, and I believe it's an old Jewish mysticism tale of descending to the dark side of the tree to retrieve the spark of divinity that is hidden there, which is almost like dealing with the dark side of yourself in order to find the light.
Or the heroine of hell, where Christ went down to hell to save all the righteous pagans.
Yeah.
That whole metaphor of descent into the underworld to pull something of value back up to the light is something that you see through tons of mythological sources.
Orpheus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even the Japanese myth where
Izanami.
Yeah, Izanami
Yeah.
is, kind of like locked in the underworld, and who is it that travels? Izanagi, I think, travels to the underworld to like retrieve her, and
Hmm.
he gets scared because she looks all rotten.
Oh yeah,
It's a really
yeah,
weird
yeah. That's
story.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, she looks rotted, so he like gets scared and runs away, and then she hates him afterwards and becomes sort of the goddess of the dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What was it that she looked all rotten, or he started to take her out and was told not to look at her until he got her out, or something?
That was the Orpheus one where he like was told not to look back at her until he got back to the
Oh, okay,
surface. But
okay.
he like just couldn't resist, and so because he looked back, she was trapped there forever.
Okay.
Yeah. In the Japanese myth, it's like he finds her in the underworld, but she's like she looks normal at first, but then he looks again and she's like rotten and has like maggots and stuff all inside her, and he gets like terrified and runs back to the surface without her. And she hates him because of that, because he left her there. So
Ah, all
yeah,
right.
that's a cool idea. I mean, it's sort of that idea that, we all have like dark sides to us. I don't mean to sound too edgy here, but we all have darker elements to ourselves. No matter,
Absolutely.
there's nothing that's completely pure. We're not pure beings, and we all have dark sides.
We all make
And
mistakes. We all make errors of judgment. We all have, selfish things that we do here and there. I mean,
Mhm.
we're faced with it through a veil of ego. That's how we interact with reality.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that those things aren't always negative. Maybe those things are there for a reason, and that sometimes they need to be used, when they're needed.
Hmm.
Maybe that's sort
Depending
of
on what they are.
yeah, depending on what they are. Maybe sometimes you need to be selfish, because sometimes being too giving could put you in a bad situation.
Right. It gets you walked all over. You got to know where to balance it. Everything in this world seems to come down to balance.
Mhm.
Something our country in general is very out of at this point.
Yeah, everything's out of
Yeah.
whack.
Like everything's very extreme, no matter what you're looking at, whether it be political or otherwise. Everything is so extreme. People are either on one extreme or the other, and it's like this is so out of balance. Nothing good is going to come of it.
Doesn't that
Well, then,
feel a little manufactured too? Doesn't it
Yes,
feel like it's on purpose for some reason?
yes.
Like
Oh, it totally feels like it's on.
Joe's throat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the thing that kills me is just I mean, we have some. I have some close friends who are very outspoken politically. Some close friends of ours who are just who I don't feel like ever take a moment to stop and say, is there a chance that I could be wrong? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I feel like I do that all the time, and I feel like it's made me a more centrist person than I tend to lean. But even when I'm at my most even when I'm at my most fervent politically, I still always have to say, there's that question, what if I'm actually the asshole? It's like that old adage, if you meet one person who's a jerk to you, they're the asshole. But if everybody's a jerk to you, you're the asshole.
Yeah.
It's
It's like that Mitchell and Webb sketch. It's like, are we the baddies?
are we the baddies? I love that so much. Oh man, that show does not get enough love stateside. But yeah, I feel like there's not enough introspection. Um, you know, in terms of
It's all
I think
react.
that comes with balance.
It's all reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, and in talking to people from so many different viewpoints, I mean, because I'm friends with people from all different viewpoints on all different stuff, I find that most people agree more than they realize. It's just the points of disagreement are blown so out of proportion.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, I think it's important. I've said this before. Sometimes there literally is no common ground that can be found. Like
True.
when it comes to like one extreme or the other, I think this is a problem a lot in this country too, is that topics are thrown about. I'm not going to speak specifics here, but topics are thrown about that are so outrageously unethical, and people are expected to compromise on them.
Mm-hmm.
When they're, let's say just on one very extreme here, like on the topic of like genocide. It's like, I can't compromise on that.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
can't say there's a middle ground between, you know, oh, we're just going to kill this many people and that'll be okay. We can all agree on that, right? Like I can't.
Yeah.
At some level, like you can't do it. But again, these are like extremes, you know. But you know, like I said, sometimes you can't meet someone in the middle on certain topics, and
Well,
you know,
that's because the people who are willing to commit genocide are often the psychopaths.
mm-hmm.
And there is no middle ground with a psychopath because the only middle ground is they get what they want.
Yeah. But you're expected to engage them in good faith.
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, the world is run by psychopaths because there's the ones who have the ambition to push themselves up to the front.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not to say that every politician everywhere is a psychopath, but I think there's a pretty heavy percentage of psychopaths and sociopaths that are in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Not just here, but in every country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that exactly. Like I think that even if you set out with Mr. Deeds Mr. Smith style good intentions, I think that the amount of soul selling that you have to do to compromise quickly, puts a stain on your moral fiber. Even my favorite politicians, I think, are as crooked as can be.
Yeah. Well, the problem too is, in that we've seen this happen time and time again in this country, is that certain elements, because of our like obsession with things like the West Wing and going down the aisle and like really trying, or a certain party's obsession with like compromise and like somehow coming, working with the other side. What they end up not seeing is that the other side is Lucy and they're Charlie Brown, and that every time they're going to pull the football out and they never learn. And that's the thing. It's like, in order for these like compromise and these things to actually work, both sides have to be acting in good faith.
Yeah. And
that if one side isn't doing that, it's never going to work, no matter how hard the other side tries. And the other side, unfortunately, will continue to delude themselves that the other side is acting in good faith. I'm trying so hard not to speak in specifics here.
Yes.
But you get what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
I'm all for the idea of like compromise. I'm all for the idea of people working together towards like common good. But that's the thing. It has to be towards a common good.
Yes.
A good for everyone, not just like a small group of people. And there's like some things you have to be unwilling to compromise on because they're just ethically and morally like right.
And I think it's important to have differing opinions. If you have just a bunch of yes men, you don't you don't get balance. You need that sort of back and forth, that discussion. We don't have conversations anymore. We have screaming matches.
Mm-hmm. But you have both sides, kind of putting forth outrageous ideas. And how are you even supposed to approach a conversation about those kind of things? Like I mentioned before, you're being expected to argue in good faith that all non-white people should be removed from the country.
Right.
How are you supposed to argue that in good faith? Like, how are you supposed to come to a compromise on that? Like,
well, here's the thing though. We don't have to take our cues from the media and the politicians. People can choose to have conversations with people they don't agree with rather than fighting them. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take a change, like a sea shift for that to happen, for people to realize, why are we listening to these psychopaths? Why are we letting them create the dialogue that we're having?
Yeah, I mean, the media in this country
I will say that
everything they can do to give those kind of people a platform.
Sure.
I will say, though, that I live in Georgia. And
congratulations.
Hold on. And I am a right-leaning guy, and I have not met a single Nazi. Like, I have not met a single white supremacist. I'm not saying it doesn't mean that they don't exist, but I feel like a lot of what we see about the prevalence of this horrible ideology, I feel like I don't know if it's deliberately being drummed up to make us fearful and to squelch discussion and to draw us further apart.
Mhm.
But it kind of feels that way. Like I don't know. I don't
Well,
know. But I feel like if it was as prevalent as an ideology as I hear about on social media and in the regular media, I
mhm.
would be seeing something about it because I'm pretty well situated to find to run into these people.
Yeah.
Well, as someone who like grew up in the South and everything, I know what you're saying. Honestly, I don't think it's like it's portrayed a lot in like media and movies and stuff as a Southern thing because of the history of the civil rights movement and everything that happened primarily in the South. But it was something that exists everywhere. I can say that I've heard more racist things said out loud in Minnesota than I've ever heard growing up in Alabama and Georgia. Um,
Well, and I, and from my time in the Midwest, I can agree with a lot of that sentiment, and I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, if you look back around the 2000s, I mean, historically the most segregated cities in America were those in Milwaukee because there was never any forced integration. So you still had these
yeah,
people, being sort of blocked off into these separate communities. So they were never really forced to confront a lot of these issues that,
yeah.
a lot of people in the South, for better or worse, have. No, I totally agree that I think that that racism is a much more prevalent, pervasive problem across the entire United States and not
Yeah.
just the American
It's
South.
a United States problem rather than a regional problem. And the other thing too, I think the reason you don't run into these people is because most of them are deeply weak, like scared people to begin with, and they don't exhibit like they don't show you that side of them in public. They show you that side of them on anonymous accounts on Twitter and on Facebook and on 4chan. Like they don't
Mhm.
but they don't talk about it at work and they don't talk about it to your face, but then they go online later and they talk because then they're protected by that shell of anonymity. They don't have to face any kind of repercussions for saying. But that's the scary thing is that I've seen more and more people saying these kind of things on social media using their real names. Like people have become bolder, and when they argue these kind of things and people are disgusted by it, they then claim, oh well, you're just intolerant. Like why aren't you able to engage with me on these ideas? And it's like some of these ideas I can't engage with. Like they're just not like we can't find any sort of common ground here. There's
And
nothing I can say to this.
and the way this ties back into what we've been talking about from the beginning is very simple. If this stuff was more let's say, the government really did come out and expose that, yes, UFOs are real. There are aliens out there saying it's going to change the dialogue on all this stuff.
Hmm.
These things could potentially bring people together rather than push them apart.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
things like I've said before on some other places, um, having like a collective sort of consciousness, uh, collective struggle tends to overwrite all these like tribal struggles that we participate in on a cultural level. Like whether that be us like uh, getting together to form labor unions to protect our rights as workers, or whether that's us knowing deep down inside that we're more than just the physical bodies that we live in, that we're more than just like black or white or whatever our physical appearance is right now, that we're human souls and that there's more to us than the flesh. Like either one of those ideas and so many others can help bring people together and eliminating all these like petty things like ideas like race that were created in the 1700s by slave traders. you know like there's no reason for us to even have these antiquated ideas other than somebody wants us to fight each other.
Mm.
They want us to be distracted. They want us to not really see what's going on under the surface. And it's very conspiracy-ish, but I honestly think, like I've said before too, it's not about black or white or conservative or leftist or any of these things in this country and even in the sort of world we live in. It's all about the haves and the have-nots. It's all about the rich and the poor. It's class consciousness. You know, Uh, we have to come to terms with the fact that there's a very small amount of people on this planet that control more wealth and power than the billions of us that exist. Of me and you and everyone else. And it's more stark than it has ever been in human history.
True. Well, that we're aware of.
Yeah, that we're aware of. The human history that we know of in the last 4,000 years. And yeah, it's important for us to study things like parapsychology, because it shows us that we're more than just this earth and these bodies,
Yeah, I mean, I will say, are the extremes as pronounced as they were when George Vanderbilt had an indoor swimming pool and there were people with dirt floors in the Dust Bowl? I mean, is it the gap really that pronounced still? It's just that the quality of living for everyone has moved up, so the rich are now absurdly buy your island rich, and the poor are no more dirt floors, have an iPhone sort of poor.
Yeah, basically. I mean, but the actual income inequality, the basic standard of living for the average U.S. citizen has increased a little bit. It's actually decreasing now. The recent UN report that certain areas of Alabama and the Deep South were less developed than some third world countries in terms of public utilities and things like public transportation and things like that. But yes, I mean, the actual amount of wealth, we're just talking about pure wealth, is concentrated in fewer hands than basically ever in recorded human history that we know of right now. You just saw the thing about Jeff Bezos having $75 billion or something like that. He has enough, from what I read, he has enough money, his net worth is enough that he could basically end world poverty 7 times over. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier. What in the world does anyone need that much wealth for?
Well, yeah, what sort of person gets that much wealth and wants to sit on it like that?
It doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Because it becomes a matter of collecting rather than needing.
Mm-hmm.
It's ooh, look how much I have. Well, I have more than you. Look at what I got. And it has nothing to do with them needing it in any way. It's just a status symbol.
But do they even think of it that way? I mean, I've heard before that once, and we're not talking about people who make $100,000 a year. Most of us think people who make that much are rich. I'm talking about people who make billions of dollars a year.
Yeah.
People who have more enough money that they could literally buy countries. What purpose is there to that? We have enough resources on this planet. We have enough money and wealth and technology that every person's needs could be taken care of tomorrow, but we're not doing that. We're instead just concentrating further and further in the hands of fewer and fewer. And I don't understand why. I mean, even just the explanation that it's just a collection, even that, I don't understand it. What?
No, but
it makes no sense to me.
It's because they don't think the way we do. If you've never had to worry about how you're going to pay bills, if you've never had to worry about how you're going to eat or how you're going to pay your rent or whatever, or mortgage or whatever it is, you don't attach the same value to money. It doesn't mean the same thing to you.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get back on track a little.
Okay.
And the probably the last thing that I could say would be important is on 2 levels are the weird things in the woods. So people disappearing, under weird circumstances in the woods. Mm-hmm. Always a very popular subject. I think it should be more of a disturbing subject, but it's very popular. And again, I think people like that creepy aspect to it. But also the fact that is part of it because we're so out of touch with nature, and that we've disconnected from something important to us. And it seems like the fairy faith kind of speaks to that as well, as that connection to nature.
If only there were conclusions in an upcoming book that said certain things, huh, Wren?
Yeah, if only.
If only.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think that there's I think that it's an extreme sign of hubris and disconnect with the world when, the most common element on our planet could literally wreck all of our electronics that we hold so dear just by touching it. I spill water on my laptop and it completely ruins it. And yet our technology is entirely based around this concept.
Mm-hmm.
I think that becoming decadent and becoming disconnected is a human thing, but this level of disconnect, I don't think we haven't seen in recorded history. I mean, Rome was disconnected, but at least they had some idea of where food came from, and interaction still had a face-to-face component for the most part. People were forced to interact, and we're just so disconnected from everything and from the land and. Yeah, I mean the fairy faith sort of forced you to acknowledge that, and it's not. I don't think it's a perfect representation of the way that the other world works, and I don't think that it's. I don't think it's entirely. I don't think that's in. I don't think that we're not calling for us to go back to practicing the fairy faith, but there was a sense of. It was rooted. If that makes sense. This idea of there being genus loci in certain areas that you had to respect and that you had to pay attention to, I think is a concept that even if it isn't, objectively true, it still imbues our surroundings with the wonder and the attention that they deserve.
And it's interesting too, because it's not like people want to be disconnected either. Like I think about YouTube channels like Primitive Technology, where it's just like a completely silent vid of like this guy building a mud hut and firing bricks, and it gets millions and millions of views, and people are just fascinated with it. I think we all kind of wish that we either knew how to do stuff like that or fantasize about just going out in the woods and building a hut and living like that, even though we know, I think deep down inside that was like a really tough life to live for people, and lots of people, it's probably miserable, but we all still sort of like fantasize about it in a weird way.
Well, you don't have to live in the woods to go out and take a hike or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but it's harder if you live in a city where you don't have that stuff readily available to you.
Well, and the idea that that you might be working longer and you might be working harder, but the idea that everything that you're doing is literally to help you survive, versus where are my TPS reports or something like that.
I don't know. Maybe Josh, you're producing for need rather than profit.
Well, what do you mean in which scenario? I'm sorry.
Well, it's like the antithesis of capitalism, because you're producing for your need rather than a profit. You're not making mud bricks because you're going to sell them. You're making mud bricks because you get to build your house out of them.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think there's a certain appeal to that for people, like basically like making what you need yourself and being like self-sufficient and taking care of your community and getting back to this sort of like society in which we're not making things to enrich one member. We're making things so that we can have a strong, healthy community in which everyone is happy and safe and content.
Man, you sound like a socialist.
I know, man. And yeah, I mean, I think that disconnect from nature, it takes us away from that. It makes us forget about the fact that people lived like that for a long time, and that's sort of, almost, what do you think about this, Josh? Like, how do you feel about like fairy offerings? Like, what does that signify? That you're like giving something back to the land that has given something to you, or?
You cut out there for a moment. What'd you say?
Oh, like, well, the idea of fairy offerings, I think, is fascinating from like a metaphorical standpoint. Like, from a metaphorical standpoint, are you giving something back to the land for giving something to you, providing for you?
I mean, it's a bit of a tithe, right? And that's in some sense. Conceptually, it's this idea that these spirits of the land have helped me bring in my harvest. It's a good harvest, and as thanks, I will, share part of it.
Mhm.
Um, I think if you want to get pragmatic about it and what it really meant, I imagine it was probably some sense of mindfulness. This idea that we have, we've set this aside for this other force. It's a little bit less for us to have. We have to be a little bit more uh, diligent about how we buy our food.
Mhm.
We have to we should be thankful for what we have. That's my sort of surface level reading. Um, it's I mean, if you look at the idea that the fairies extracted the foison from the food, the strength of the food, it shares a lot in common with the concept of burnt offerings. This idea that somehow by burning this sacrifice, the essence of the food is transported through smoke to the heavens.
Mhm.
Um, but honestly, I think it's probably just serving some sort of mindfulness role, um, in terms of really drawing oneself to be present of the fact that we exist because of the land. We have this food at our disposal, and there's a certain thankfulness that should come out of that. That's my
Yeah.
vague sort of two cents right there.
It kind of makes me think about instilling a sense of like generosity within people. Like the idea
Mm.
that if you have these things and that you should share them with other people, like share it back with the land, but also as a lesson to people in the community that, you know, it's okay to not hoard, I guess. It's okay to like share. Because I mean, the food, from a materialist point of view, they're just wasting. They're just letting the stuff rot or they're burning it, and it doesn't make
Right.
sense from like a material point of view. But from the sort of metaphorical metaphorical images and feelings it could instill in the community, I feel
Well,
like it
yeah, and
works.
in that sense, I think it's I think it is akin to the tithe. We're almost that. I mean, this is a little bit different, but like the render unto Caesar, render unto the fairies.
Yeah, render to the
Theirs.
fairies what is due them.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that. I mean, I honestly don't think that the point of tithing. I mean, for example, my wife and I tithe, but we don't tithe to the church. We tithe to charities, usually Christian affiliated, admittedly, but we tithe to charities where we it'll actually go towards actual actual mission work in terms of
Mhm.
improving people's lives. We've our primary one this past 2 years has been a homeless shelter.
Mhm.
So I think at its root, that's what tithing should be. Of course, now tithing has become, give money to the church so that we can buy a new, sound system for our rock band and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
But I think that probably is the real, in Christ's original message, the intent of tithing, which is completely in line with what you're talking about. This idea of instilling generosity, this idea of instilling the fact that this is you are lucky to have what you have, and this is a fleeting uh, moment in your existence, and you should be appreciative of what resources you are fortunate enough to be able to share.
Yeah. It's almost like
Well,
a reminder of the non-material nature of the universe too. Like you can't take it with you. There are no rich men in heaven kind of idea.
mm,
That
Mm.
you should give up something. It's
Yeah,
also
I
like
mean,
it's kind of
yeah, yeah.
aesthetic. Like giving up something in this material world kind of prepares you more for the non-material.
Now, I'm gonna flip the question around to you. Where do you see this role in terms of magical practice and ancestor altars? Is it sort of a similar thing? Because that feels like it has a different. I mean, I know it's obviously out of the same tradition, no question.
Hmm.
But in magical practice, it feels less. It doesn't feel like it's about generosity or sharing plenty in terms of ancestor altars and whatnot. Am I right with that sort of summation?
Honestly, I don't do that much ancestor worship. I was talking to somebody about this earlier because, I have a weird and strained relationship with my own sort of family and ancestors. Um, but I do offer up things to the spirits, like sort of a big S spirits every now and then. Um, and it is sort of a tithe kind of thing, or like a thank you kind of thing. Like I remember when during the summer I was maybe going to buy a bike because it's really nice biking up here. It's very flat. It's easy to get around my neighborhood and stuff. And I found two bikes, just like one kind of like somebody was giving away, and another one I just found an abandoned one. And I'm not saying the spirits like gave me these bikes, but I just went outside and poured a little rum out onto the ground and said thanks. Like thanks for giving me these things. And I feel like, yeah, you're right. It's like a gratefulness kind of thing. It's important to feel grateful for the blessings that you do receive. 'Cause if you,
Although that's sort of another modality of what we're talking about too, though, is that like this idea often like just like with the idea of tithing being corrupted, the idea that well if I don't tithe I might go to hell, well
Mm.
if I don't put out food for the fairies they might ruin my house or they might
Mhm.
blight my crops or if I don't show some respect there'll be consequences, which is sort of it's a human thing to do that, but it's a corruption of that sort of generosity that you said or that thankfulness that you sort of said that you felt.
Yeah, it feels very easy to slide into that, especially if you're the kind of person who feels uneasy or maybe feels like the things you've gotten like you don't deserve or something. Like you begin to become scared. Like you said,
Right.
if I don't give this, then my crops are going to fail. You shouldn't be giving things because you're scared. You should be giving things because you're happy, and you're saying thank you.
Yeah.
So
It's like being in a relation. Oh, sorry. What
no,
was that, Soraya?
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's like the person who's in a relationship and can't believe that this person legitimately loves them or appreciates them for who they are.
Mm.
Hmm.
What I was going to say is that the other thing about having a healthy respect for nature, feeling a connection to the nature, is that we don't destroy it.
Yeah.
You look what we're doing to the rainforests and, just forests in general being, cut down at record levels. And although it has lessened a little bit, the damage is already done. And if we had not lost that disconnect from nature where it just became a thing for us to use, that this is another area where these type of things, whether it be your pagan beliefs or the understanding that some of this stuff connects deeply into nature, it may have prevented some of that.
What if the people going missing in the woods, like you mentioned before, is nature taking back what it's due?
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
You know, like something Josh is probably familiar with. In Atlanta, I remember when I would drive to work every day, they had these signs on the road that said, uh, "This many people have died on Georgia highways this year." And every
Yep.
day as I would drive to work, I would see that number creep up, until it was, in the hundreds by the time, December rolled around. And it always struck me as like a sacrificial kind of thing. It's a very, Neil Gaiman, American Gods kind of idea, but
Yeah, it
almost like
is.
the
It's
highway
interesting.
system, like the highway system was a god, and it demanded blood, and that this was a tally of all the sacrifices that have been offered up to the god highway.
Nice.
And that's
Now
a
I'm
bit
not
off
gonna be able to
topic.
think of that at all. See that at all without thinking of that.
It was horrifying. Those signs used to creep me out so bad because you know how bad the traffic is there, and I was always every time I drove to work, I was like, I could die today. This is like, this could be it for me. in Georgia on the Daytona 400 trying to get up to Alpharetta. It's like, you never know. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. When you first mentioned the thing about people going missing in the woods, I was thinking, well, maybe it's important for us to understand why this is happening so we can protect people from it. But I don't know if you could protect people from it. I mean, maybe
it's
that just
never
has to happen.
Yeah, it's never you. It's always the other person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to say nothing of the fact that I recall a couple of years ago, I'm so old, sometime 10 years ago or less, that there was a person whose tire flew off their car and bounced across the alternate lane of 85 and went straight into someone's windshield. Can't do a thing about that. You know, that road tally didn't make either of those people more careful.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I think, as I recall, both the tire loser and the tire receiver both died.
Mm.
Yeah, Georgia highways are weird. I remember that apparently 85 caught on fire after I left, and then half of it like melted. And then there was a tiger that was
wait. How does a road catch on fire?
The city was storing material. City was storing materials underneath an overpass, and there was some homeless person who I think was high at the time and ended up setting them on fire, and it ended up making the overpass buckle. And this is like the one artery into downtown Atlanta. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, there was a gas main that blew up underneath 20 just as a motorcyclist was going over it. So he catapulted into the air, you know.
Yeah. Well, there was a tiger loose on it at one point.
Yep.
While I was still living there, an airplane crashed onto the interstate. That was an interesting day getting to work. It's a nightmare. I don't even know how to explain it. It's almost supernaturally bad. Not enough blood for the highway god, I guess.
You know, that seems like a good place to end it right there.
Not enough blood for the highway god.
Josh, where can people find you?
Well, right here. And also at joshuacutchin.com. I'm going to try. I know I always say I'm going to try to blog more, but I really am, I promise. You can find both of my books, Brimstone Deceit and Trojan Feast, at Amazon.com, and my new book, Thieves in the Night, should be coming out at the end of this summer, at the latest.
All right. And Wren, where can people find you?
Hey, I can be found at liminalroom.com, where I probably need to start putting my out-of-body experiences on there instead of just typing them in long form on Twitter. And I can be found on Twitter at Mr_Apol, APOL.
All right. Well, I thank both of you, and as always, more blood for the highway god.
Absolute pleasure.
More blood for the highway god.
See you next time. And a special thanks to our Patreons who are donating at the $10 or above level. Christopher Sheehan, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Chris Elmquist, Super Inframan, Patricia Giaquinta, Lauren Melton, John Eddy, Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.